United 2614, Cleveland Center closed, radar services terminated, frequency change approved.
Frequency change approved, United 2614. Bye-bye, thank you very much.
American 2114, New York Center, you up?
New York Center, American 2144, flight level 380.
American 2144, New York Center, reset with transponder, squawk 1365.
Squawking 1365, American 2144.
United 2355, Washington Center closed, radar service.
Hello, I'm Agent Presta, and today we're going to look at how to compress the audio output of an application in Windows. The primary focus of this is going to be on the application vPilot, which is used for VATSIM, and that's going to be the primary focus. But keep in mind that these procedures I'm going to talk about could be applied to other programs as well. If you needed to compress the audio of a different program, it could be used across different ones. Why would we want to compress the audio of vPilot in particular? I've found, I'm relatively new to VATSIM, and the first thing I noticed was there's a lot of variance in the volume of different people who are talking in vPilot. People have the ability to adjust their microphones, and that means that you're going to have some people that adjust them more on the quiet side, some people who boost it up and have it loud, and there's not a whole lot within the software that's regulating that. So that means for me, when I'm listening in, I might have to bump up the volume quite a bit to be able to hear one controller, and then someone else ends up talking who has their microphone set really loud, and then it's blasting in my ears, and it's not very pleasant to listen to. Not only is it not pleasant for me as the listener, but I also stream, and sometimes I found that when people are talking, it can get in the clipping range for audio, so that's no good for if people are doing recordings or streams. So that's why we're looking at compressing the audio. A little bit of background of what audio compression is for anyone who's not familiar. I'll walk through that very briefly just to touch on the concept. This might be a waveform, a sample waveform that's not compressed. And for example, this might be audio from, VATSIM. And you can have someone who's talking quiet and then someone who's talking loud. And you can see that there's a lot of difference between what's quiet and what's loud. So what we're trying to do with compression is to normalize the volume. So you might end up throwing a threshold and say anything that's above, or outside of this threshold, we want to compress it. And so with that, you would end up getting a compressed audio signal that might look something like this. There's not, the peaks have been shrunken down. Essentially what it's doing is it's just quieting the louder parts. And then depending on the settings that you put in your compressor, you can tweak how that happens and how aggressive it is. But you look at this waveform and it's much more apparent that the quiets and the loud sections are closer together, and then you could either take this raw or you could boost it, but everything should be more on a level playing field after the audio has been compressed. So how do we implement compression? How do we take the audio that's coming out of an application such as vPilot and compress it? We use something called a VST plugin, and we pair that up to an audio source within Windows. Typically, VST plugins would be used within an audio application. You'd apply it to like a soundtrack. You can also, for people who are familiar with OBS, you can load up VST plugins and have them, alter the sound of a microphone or a device that's playing sound. But what we're looking to do is we're looking to apply it to a Windows audio source. So a little bit different scenario with this than is typical, but there is a excellent software out there that allows us to do this, and so we'll be using that in a little bit. I'm going to break down at this point in this whole recording. I'm going to put chapters into the YouTube timeline, so feel free to jump forward if you're looking for a particular section. But I'm going to walk through the whole process of why we're doing what we're doing. To start out with, the default configuration would be you have your program over here, such as we have vPilot, and that is going to be configured typically to have its output audio go directly to, say, your default audio output device. It might be something else, but typically you'd have it go to your default audio output device. So just a straight connection. What we're looking to do is we're looking to interrupt that, and we want to throw in our VST compressor into that chain somehow, so we can compress what's coming out of vPilot. What we can do is we can get a VST file, and this is the application I was referring to. It's called Equalizer APO. Equalizer APO allows us to apply VST files to one of these playback sources or output devices. So one of the beauties of Equalizer APO is it doesn't have to run. It's essentially, the way I think of it is it kind of bakes whatever settings you configure. It kind of bakes that into the Windows drivers, so to speak, or the Windows runtime for processing the audio, and it basically sets the settings, and then there's no overhead really. There's no there's no resources necessarily that it's using, or at least it's very little if there is. So we can configure this up to our default output device, but there's a problem with that. And that problem is that, yes, it's going to apply that compressor to vPilot because it's going over here, but then also all the other sounds that are playing through that default output device, such as your simulator, or maybe you have music playing in the background, or maybe you have a video playing. Anything that's going to that output device, it's going to be applying the compressor to that as well. And we don't really want that. We're mainly just trying to target one application. So the way to combat that, this is the final audio chain that we're looking at. And this is what I was playing with last night, and it seems to be working very well. There's a software, VB Audio Virtual Audio Cable. Essentially what it is it's a dummy audio device, if you think of it that way. Essentially a driver that gets installed, and it gives us a playback device and a recording device that's linked together. And it's essentially a dummy device in that we can use that as a platform to pair our application, vPilot, and pair our VST file through Equalizer APO, and then it will only be handling that aspect of it, and then we'll pair it into our default playback device by monitoring the output of that cable. So this whole aspect of it, for me, it was confusing to get my head around it. The wording of these input and output, recording and playback, it can get a little bit confusing, but I'm just going to walk through how to set it up, and hopefully this helps anyone else who's in the same boat who might be looking to do this. So this is what we're going to be working towards. We're going to walk through each part step by step. The first part is going to be to download all the files. So we need to download, if I go back here, this VB audio virtual audio cable. We need to download our compressor if you don't already have one. And we need to download Equalizer APO. I have the 3 websites listed up where you can find those, and I'll show people just in case you want to make sure you're in the right place. This is VB Audio, where you can download right here the audio cable. They're also the same company that makes Voice Meter. May be familiar with that for streamers out there. SourceForge is where you can download Equalizer APO. And then Reaper is a digital audio workstation, and that's where I've downloaded my plugins, my VST plugins. Very handy set of plugins that's free, not just for this application, but if you want to use those for other applications as well, very handy to have. Okay, so after we've downloaded our files, we're going to tackle the first chunk of this. That is getting VB Audio virtual audio cable set up and configured. So what you're going to do once you download that file, you're going to install it, which it's a pretty straightforward installation. It's basically, as I mentioned, installing a driver for a dummy audio device. And let me pull up here where you would where you go in to check that. So here down in your speakers, right mouse click that, go to Open Sound Settings, and then come to Sound Control Panel. This is the best place I found to monitor all this stuff. So I've got my default audio device, and then if I scroll down, we'll see under playback, I now have this cable input. If I go to recording, I have my default microphone. If I scroll down, now I have this cable output. So these are all the VB Audio virtual cable pieces. One thing to make sure of, once you install this, make sure that your default audio devices are still set. When I installed it, it changed the cable to be my default device. I don't want that. I want my default to be my microphone. And then for playback, I want to make sure that my default is going to be, you know, my speakers. So this is where you'd go in to check that. So verify that devices show up, that they are not designated as default devices. And then the last step is to monitor the cable output. What do we mean by that? If we come here to recording, some people might be aware, if you have a microphone, you can right mouse click, go to Properties, go to Listen, and you can say, listen to this device. And that will play whatever's coming through your microphone through your speakers. What we want to do is we want to set that up for our cable output. So right mouse click, go to Properties, go to Listen, and then check listen to this device. You want to check that and then click OK, and then that's all you have to do in there. So that step that we just went over, that's this. That pairs up the output to our default playback device. It's going to monitor that through our speakers. So at this point we have this part taken care of, and we have the all the playback stuff set up, good to go there. Moving along, we're going to take a look at the application side of things. Again, in this instance, looking specifically at vPilot. Can move back over to here. So within vPilot, and again, this is specific to this application, this is what I recommend, configure the device to output audio to the virtual audio cable's input. So you go into your settings, go to audio, and then where it says cable, or where it says output device, we want to output all of the audio that's coming out of the application to the input of that virtual cable. So you want to do that. This is the one step, regardless of what application you have, it has to be able to let you select the output device. As long as you can do that, you can do this to any application. So set that, and then what I recommend is set the output volume to 0. The reason why I say that is we will be tweaking the output volume through the VST or through our post-processing. I think that's the best place to do it. Just leave this at 0 here. Save us some problems later on. Okay, and that's all there is to do for vPilot. We'll move on to getting our compressor installed. So if you recall, we downloaded that earlier. You double click on the installation file, whether you downloaded the 32 or 62-bit version, you're going to run that. Something to keep in mind when you're going through the installation, for this exercise, all that we're looking at is the compressor, which is recomp. You can uncheck all the other ones if you don't want them. You can leave them if you like. It doesn't hurt to have the other ones, but we're looking at recomp, so make sure that one's checked. When you install it, it's probably going to go to, C program files, and then VST plugins, and then replugs. You can download it. You can install this wherever you want to, but just make sure you know where it's being installed, because we're going to have to reference that path here in the next step. So just take note of that. And that's the installation of your VST files. That installation, by the way, it's not installing a program. It's pretty much just unzipping a bunch of VST files. So a lot of the stuff is pretty lightweight. Last part is getting Equalizer APO set up. This one is probably the biggest step, I'd say. But if everything else is set up correctly, this hopefully will be pretty smooth. So you downloaded Equalizer APO, double click the file to install it. Note at the end of the installation process, it's going to ask you what devices you want APO to be installed to. When I installed it, I had my default output device and this VB audio cable selected. You can select whatever you want to, as long as, for this exercise, make sure that the cable input is selected under playback devices. We don't care about the capture devices, just looking at playback and then the cable input for the VB audio virtual cable. So we'll install it to that at least. You can check others if you want to. And you can also come back to this window later on if you need to as well. And then we set up the compressor and other elements within the configuration editor. So once the program's installed, you're going to fire up the configuration editor. And that's what I'm going to walk through next. Right here. So when it opens up, this is all going to be blank, but we're going to want to fill it in with at least some of these. You can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different elements. I threw in a little bit more than is needed, but I'll kind of give you an idea of how to do this. I'll walk through how to do each one. A little bit of background. Some of this might get a little bit confusing depending on what you're looking to do. There's a config file, and whatever's in the config file, that is what is run essentially across all of your devices. You can create additional files. In this case, I created this file and I'm referencing it from the config file. You can do, save and save as. You can open. I have a few different templates, but just keep in mind, what I would recommend is just go straight into the config file and then add stuff in from here. but just know that you can create other files. You just have to reference them within the config file. So hope that's not too confusing. I hope that that tidbit of information helps if anyone's banging their head against the wall, because I was banging my head up against the wall for a little bit trying to figure that out. So the config file, if you weren't using this for anything else, set this up within the config file would be my recommendation. All right. So let's walk through this. The first thing that we need to add, and this is very important, we need to say what devices this is going to be affecting. Everything after this is going to be affecting this output. So go to, again, you won't have any of these. Click on the plus symbol, say control, and then say device, select device. This will come up, say selected devices, change, and then unchecked select all devices. We only want to select the cable input device. This is our virtual cable. Select that, say OK, and there you go. Everything after this will only be applied to the virtual cable. So that's what we have as step one. I'm going to go ahead and remove this since it's already there. The second one is our compressor plugin. So you go to add, and then plugins, VST plugin. It will come up like this. VST plugin, click on this open window, and this is where you would go in to wherever Reaper installed those plugins. Again, it's likely under program files, VST files, Reaper plugins or something. In this case, I was looking for something else, but you navigate to wherever the DLL file is, which the DLL file is going to be the VST plugin. Click on it and open it up. The name of that file here, again, you got VST plugins, replugs. It's going to be recomp standalone. I think I have another rex comp, but just choose the recomp standalone DLL file. Go click on open and it'll just reference that. Along this one, we're going to jump into the details of it. Next step is going to be click on open panel. This is where you set the parameters for the compressor. Now, if you're setting this up for vPilot and you set the output to 0 like I recommended before, you can probably copy all these values that I have, and I think that it should work the same way that it's working on my system. So one thing to keep in note, the way this is configured, ideally you'd be able to see readouts on these bars when you're playing audio through whatever application, vPilot, you'd be able to see it. Unfortunately, the way that these plugins work, it doesn't work through Equalizer APO in that way. So I pretty much had to blindly guess without being able to see any readouts, use some other applications to try and monitor the output levels or the input levels. But I set my threshold. This is the main adjustment. I set this to -20 decibels. And then I left that alone. Attack, I adjusted to 6 milliseconds. Release, brought that down slightly to 60 milliseconds. The ratio, this is an important one. Set that somewhere. I set it to 5. You can look up, for vocals, I think it's usually around 3 to 5 is what you'd set the attack or the set the ratio at. Knee size, I left that alone, and everything else I left alone. Yes, everything else I left alone. Wet and dry, leave those as is. But it's mainly the threshold and the ratio. Set those up. If you match this, I think that it should work just fine. and then say OK. So there's that setup. You can also add in other filters if you want to. I added in a high pass filter just to cut out some of the low frequencies if someone gets on and their microphone's kind of bassy. You know, usually if you were listening into a you know, 2A radio, you wouldn't have bass frequencies, so I just went in to cut some of those out. You can add whatever filters you'd like. The last one that we should add in is an amp. So go to plus, and where is this one? Basic filters preamp. So add in the preamp. This is going to be our master volume control. So I said to leave the volume within vPilot set to 0. This is the knob that we're going to use to adjust the volume of vPilot instead of that. So that is the setup that I'm using at the moment. I would recommend check down in the description, or sorry, check down in the comments of this video. If I end up coming up with any alterations or change things, I'll probably put in a comment and pin it. So I'd recommend just checking down there if things have changed. I've only run this just for, you know, testing, so I might tweak it later on or have further comments. So definitely check down in the comments to see if I've made any other adjustments to this. But the next step is to test things out. So let's see. Hop back over to our presentation. Everything should be good to go. And the next thing is verifying the setup, you know, testing it out. So this would be my recommended test procedure. Spawn in, you know, for vPilot, spawn into a busy region in SIM, start up your aircraft engine, log into VATSIM, tune into a frequency that's busy. You could tune into, you know, like an ATIS or something like that that's constantly giving a readout, but I'd recommend, you know, a live frequency where people are talking with different levels, you know, of their mic set and stuff like that. Yeah, ensure the aircraft's running so that you can hear the sounds from SIM. What we want to do is make sure that vPilot is the only application that these adjustments are being made to, not SIM as well. So tune into a busy frequency and then verify that you can hear VATSIM. I would say come over here to Equalizer APO, and the nice thing is you can easily disable these things. So I would recommend disable everything. If you disable everything, you should hear all your sounds as they would normally be. You should hear your aircraft engine, you should hear people talking on VATSIM, should be as if nothing has changed. If all that works out, what I would say is turn on the preamp and dial it down. Wait till someone's talking and then dial this thing down and see, does their voice cut out? Ideally, the voices should cut out, but you should still hear the engine. You should still hear the sim running, you know, anything else. It should only be, you know, kind of move this up and down. It should only be the voices that are affected. If that all checks out, then that is great news. That means that it's all been set up correctly. That means that Equalizer APO is affecting that source, and then you can come back in, turn on everything else. Actually, I take that back. You will need to have this one checked as well to make sure that it's only affecting the VB audio virtual cable. You'll need to have that and the preamp checked when you're doing this test. Once you have all that, I'd recommend turning these on and then give a listen in. And then if you say, oh, it needs, you know, the voices are a little bit too loud, come here to this gain knob and adjust it here. I'd recommend this being the place to adjust it. You could also come down into, you know, your Windows sound settings like the volume mixer, and you could adjust stuff in there, but I'd recommend opening up the configuration editor and tuning this when you want to change the volume of, you know, maybe have a loud aircraft and you need to bring up the, you know, the voices. I'd recommend doing it there. That's all there is to it. I hope you found this video to be helpful.